of Directors, the Melvin B. Tolson Denzel Washington Forensic Society, and the Wiley College student body, I welcome you to this evening. Tonight is an evening of celebration. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to get together to witness a debate between Harvard University and Wiley College. We are here tonight to celebrate. We're celebrating the meeting of two acclaimed institutions. We are here to proudly represent our respective institutions, but also to discuss important issues of the day and pay respect to differing points of view and opinions. Debate is a unique activity. It's an activity which demands contrary positions, but allows us to be adversaries on stage and friends upon leaving it. We are celebrating this intellectual activity which unites individuals in discourse and acts as a catalyst to change. Debate at Wiley College has been a powerful catalyst throughout the world. In 1930, the courageous team of Wiley College broke the color barrier by participating in the first interracial debate in the United States. In 1932, Wiley participated in the first interracial debate in the South. In 1935, Wiley defeated the top-ranked USC team in Southern California. In 1942, Wiley debate alumnus James Farmer Jr. co-founds the Congress on Racial Equality, which plays a pivotal role in the fight for civil rights. Wiley debate has shaped history since the tenure of Tolson, but is no less influential today. In 2012 and 2013, Wiley College has established its bold Communicate Through Debate initiative, which seeks to change education by teaching every student on this campus how to debate and reinforces it throughout the campus culture. It has been said on several occasions that this initiative can change the face of education. Well, tonight, we add this moment to the legacy and history of Wiley College's Melvin B. Tolson Denzel Washington Forensic Society. This is the first meeting between these two teams on this campus. I'm sure these teams will debate with the prowess of two contending prize fighters. However, just as all debaters should, we will respect one another and strive to understand the point of view and celebrate our ability to engage in an intellectual discussion and advocate for those who may not be able to advocate for themselves. So welcome to history, and welcome to our celebration. Before I leave the stage, I'd like to discuss a little bit about this debate. This debate is a form of parliamentary debate, which means that it was based upon the British Parliament. What you're going to see is alternating discussions between these two debaters. They are allowed to ask questions. In doing so, they will rise. The speaker will decide whether or not they wish to ask or answer questions. This type of debate, because it was developed in the British Parliament, thrives on audience interaction. We encourage you to reward good argumentation. And the way to do that is to simply knock on your chair. This lets the debaters know that you're in agreement with what they're saying. You will see each speaker give an opening speech, and then each team will end in a rebuttal. The affirmative, Wiley College, will open and close the debate. That's the affirmative's obligation. And the negative will refute the affirmative. Our question of the day is one that's very timely. It's one that's very important, and it's one regarding schools. The debaters will tell you exactly what the topic is, but it's important to know that this topic comes straight from the headlines. It discusses whether school administrators should be trained and allowed to carry firearms on campus. With the rash of school shootings throughout the country, I think that this is a topic whose time has come for discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, with no further ado, the debate.
In order to get it right, we have secured 3 outstanding judges. I'm looking at them and they're looking at me and saying, what do you mean, get it right?
Good evening.
Good evening.
First and foremost, I would like to thank President and CEO, Dr. Haywood L. Strickland, the Board of Trustees, the administration, coaching staff, and students of the Melvin B. Tolson Denzel Washington Forensic Society, Harvard Speech and Parliamentary Debate Team, and the Wiley College student body. I'd also like to give a brief blanket of thanks to the Peanut Gallery and to the judges for being here this evening. Thank you very much. Whenever you're ready. The 31st President of the United States, Herbert Hoover, once said, "Children are our most valuable resource." It is because we agree with President Hoover that we stand today in favor of a resolution that seeks to protect our children and young adults in centers of education that foster their growing spirits and ambitions. Today's resolution states, resolved, school administrators should be trained and authorized to carry concealed firearms on school grounds. To begin, we'll start with a few observations. First, according to the Center for Education Reform's 2010 data, there are more than 132,000 public K-12 schools hosting more than 55 million children in the United States of America. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reveals that there are more than 236,000 administrators staffing these schools. Second, the resolution does not advocate that all staff members of educational centers carry firearms, only administrators, framing the debates very narrowly. The proposals suggested in the world of education policymaking today are fairly limited. Kenneth Trump, president of the National School Safety and Security System, argues the vast majority of teachers don't want to be armed with guns, but rather textbooks and computers. We agree that teachers have another focus to attend to. A small number of administrators, not teachers, would be allowed to participate. This is not a wild idea to arm every adult on campus, but rather to have a small, trained force to contain violent disruptions until professional armed forces can arrive. Third, centers of education should be sanctuaries for development, but unfortunately, we are realizing that the sanctity of our educational centers can be disrupted. Following last month's massacre in Connecticut that took the lives of 26 individuals, 20 of whom were children, schools in at least 3 states, including Illinois, Texas, and Tennessee, are in the process of training and arming their administrators to help preserve the sanctity of our school grounds, while advocates on opposing ends of the gun control, gun rights spectrum often seize upon these tragedies to further political agendas. My partner and I believe today's debate is not about the right to bear arms. It's about analyzing policy to keep educational grounds a sanctuary for academic development.
Hear, hear.
With these observations in mind, we advocate for a system proposed by the Illinois Washington School District. Administrators would be offered training to be part-time police officers. After 40 hours of initial firearm training, they could carry a firearm on school days, on school premises, as long as they're enrolled in the additional 8 months of the same training taken by part-time police officers. Their duties would be restricted: no patrols, no walking on the grounds. They will be authorized to maintain a concealed firearm during their normal administrative duties. We will support our plan starting with our first contention. Defensive measures alone are not adequate to protect students and contain violent situations. Regular school drills and locked classroom doors with bulletproof windows can be effective in limiting the damage caused by an individual on a violent rampage. But if a gunman attacks when students are not in class, let's say they're at lunchtime, for example, these defense-only measures may not be adequate at stopping an individual. Crisis response plans cannot account for every situation. According to the Atlantic Journal-Constitution, experts on school shootings describe the shooters as disturbed young men who expect to die. Their goal is to kill as many people as possible before being stopped by a bullet or self-inflicted wounds. Lieutenant Danny Hurt argues that police response time is what will save lives. Time is of the essence. You have to stop the carnage. Well, ideally, administrators shouldn't have to take on the role of a part-time police officer. The truth is that we often cannot rely on timely or coordinated police responses to arrive fast enough. At Sandy Hook's tragedy, gunfire could be heard for approximately 11 minutes. Yet, according to a CNN timeline of events at the school, it took police responders 20 minutes when they were only in a 3-mile radius of the school. Every minute it takes for an off-campus police officer to arrive is another minute for the shooter. School administrators are ideal first responders. Their offices are located on campus, and with the proper training, they can provide the first line of defense before professional police forces arrive. I will take your one of three.
Oh.
We're strictly dealing with, I hope you know the question, we're strictly dealing with administrators, and school administrators who are the first line of defense. We are specifically saying that these school administrators can stop that shooter that will possibly continue on a spree without that school administrator in the building. Moving on down. First line of defense before professional police forces arrive. In the case of Sandy Hook, a school psychologist and the vice principal were the first to respond to the sounds of gunfire. Only the BP returned from the hallway wounded. While it is impossible to determine the exact outcomes of what-if scenarios, it is our belief that had that administrator been trained to carry a firearm, the gunman's carnage could have been stopped far earlier, saving precious lives in the interim between the carnage and the police response. Moving on to our second contention, the status quo imposes pacifism upon America's schools, forcing them to pay the moral price for conscience. On January 17th, a 7-year-old boy at Wade Preparatory Elementary School in Rockaway, Queens, brought a loaded gun to his school, not to attack, but to defend himself should the need arise. On December 18th of last year, an 11-year-old boy in West Kearns Elementary School in Washington County, Utah, was told by his parents, "Arm yourself," and was suspended for doing so. On January 18th, Texarkana police responded to a student bringing a gun to College Hill Middle School, again, out of fear for his safety. George Orwell wrote, "Those who adhere to violence can only do so because others are committing violence on their behalf." We examine the world in which we live and recognize that our country and all other countries on this earth exist because of this truth. Thank you.
Thank Wiley College and everyone that has helped us come here today to debate. I'd like to thank the government side for sending forth a wonderful motion, and I'd like to thank everyone here that's here to watch this. Thank you very much. We're very glad to be here. What if Sandy Hook had turned out differently? What if we don't remember the person that gave their life in order to delay the shooter as a hero? What if we instead remember that that hero had a gun, and in firing that gun, hit other students. The New York Police Department has a 32% accuracy rating with firearms outside of the ranges. Earlier last year, in front of the Empire State Building, 9 innocent bystanders were shot before 2 police officers were able to take down one culprit. We say that in the chaos of these schools, we say that with these children at risk, we should not put guns in the hands of school administrators, and we should instead do what is the safest, which is to not add fire to the flame, which is to de-escalate these situations. Currently, our method is that when there is a spree shooting, we hunker down and hide. And maybe the optics of that seem cowardly, but in essence, that is the safest thing to do. Why is it so? Firstly, it prevents the loss of life. Secondly, most importantly, it prevents the escalation of a conflict. How many of these spree shootings were planned out? How many shootings at all are planned out? Many incidents of gun violence or any other kind of violence in schools are spontaneous or have a single target or are altercations that escalate and escalate. And if a student with a weapon is afraid for their life because they see blood on their hands and they expect an administrator coming round the corner to shoot them down, they won't stop. They will keep on firing. This will escalate the number of casualties in these schools. Instead, what we do right now is we wait for a police response. Because in doing so, what they do is they defuse the situation. The police don't go in guns blazing. What they do is they secure the perimeter. They ensure that students get out safely, and then they try to negotiate with the perpetrator. They try to calm down the perpetrator. Because these are human beings. These are human beings with brains, with emotions. And what you need to do is you need to calm down these instigators of violence, because they too are human, and you need to bring them back to that point of sanity. We say that under their motion, under their resolution, if this policy were to pass, then what you would have is more chaos in these school shootings. From one very visible shooter that the police and other people can target to make sure that they go down. Instead, you get multiple people around these schools, around with weapons, firing them off into the air. What we can see in the Gabrielle Gifford shooting. The reason why there was a person in the audience that had a weapon but stayed down is because that person was afraid of firing their weapon because they weren't sure if anybody else in the audience had a weapon. They weren't sure whether the police would target them, and we say that's a safe thing to do. We say that if there were guns in other school shootings, we say there were guns in Aurora, we would say that more people will die from friendly fire and more people will die from hostile fire than otherwise. In Sandy Hook, way before the police arrived, the shooter killed himself. Why? Because there was a pause in the amount of violence. He killed the classroom and then stopped shooting. He shot himself. We say that when you escalate the conflict, when you introduce more people, more targets, more people with guns, you keep that spree shooting going until the police arrive, rather than stopping it early. When you look at all the other school shootings out there, what happened is that the school shooters stopped shooting way before the police managed to intervene, and even if they were around the periphery, before they went into the schools, what they did was they shot themselves, or they gave up, even though there were targets. In Columbine, there were students that reported that Dylan Cleobold went around with guns and saying that they were going to shoot them, but not doing anything, and then walking around not doing anything for a long time. Why? Because all of the targets were out of range. All of the targets were not visible. Because they didn't escalate the situation, they didn't put more fire into that flame. We say that the method now we have is safest. And if we can improve police response times, then that's something we want to do. If we can improve the response of, say, people with proper training, which we'll address in a later point, then that's something that we want to do. But we don't want administrators arming themselves, escalating these kinds of situations. And back to the point about friendly fire. If you have these spree shooters that occasionally use these automatic weapons and police, administrators using firearms, then what you're going to have is an administrator trying to take down the shooter, not aware of who exactly the shooter is. Is he a student? Is he a stranger? Is he another administrator? And then missing or hitting students. And what you also have is then the shooter shooting back with automatic or semi-automatic weapons fire, which is ridiculously indiscriminate. That leads to a higher body count than anything. And we say we want to stop those kinds of deaths because we want to stop these situations from escalating. But we also say that in terms of making schools safer overall, we are mistaking the tree for the forest. Why is this so? In 2004, there were 21 students killed inside school campuses versus 1,513 students in this country killed outside of school campuses. Many more students are killed or are the victims of violence every day outside or inside school campuses, but outside of these free shootings. And we say that if we really want to make schools a safe place, what we need to do is we need to make them feel safe. Studies cited in the Washington Post compared schools with armed guards versus schools with guards that aren't armed versus schools that did not have any guards at all. In the schools that had no guards, there was a low level of crime. There was a certain level of crime. In terms of the schools that had guards that were unarmed, there was a lower rate of crime, but there was no difference between schools that had guards that were not armed versus schools that had guards that were armed. Comparatively, schools that did have armed guards or schools that did have weapons on campus reported in their student population was that many students felt afraid. Many students felt afraid of whether they be armed officers or whether they be in one of the 18 states in which this motion is currently fact. And when they're scared of school administrators, scared of approaching these school administrators to talk about their problems, their other problems, because they are scared because there are weapons in those schools. We don't think a climate of fear is the best place to teach our children. We don't think students growing up in that climate of fear is any good for these students. We believe that a good education leads people away from violence. It leads people away from crime. It leads people away from altercations, providing us opportunities to live good and peaceful lives. And what hurts our education hurts that collective humanity that we are all striving towards. And when there are guns in our schools, that creates that climate of fear. When there are guns in our schools that are unnecessary and bringing down those kinds of crimes, bringing down that kind of violence that perpetuates our schools more often than spree shootings. The silent killers that plague our nation more often than news broadcasts of school shootings. We say that right now we're compelled by the fear that is struck in us by exceptionally tragic events, and therefore ignoring the more tragic events that are systemic, that are continuous. And we don't want to drive away administrators who are now forced to carry weapons with training but no field experience. We don't want to make it so that a child going to school is afraid to approach his principal about violence that is threatening him. We oppose on this side the militarization of our schools, the waging of an Iraq war in our classrooms in fear of WMDs, but not a crippled education system, not the violence that is systemic, and not our desperate poverty. It is for these reasons that we are very proud to oppose.
I'm not going to be too repetitive on Ailey's thanks, but I would like to give just a few, brief nuggets of thanks. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my personal Savior, Jesus Christ. Second, I'd like to thank President Haywood L. Strickland, the Board of Trustees, my fabulous and wonderful debate team, Christopher Medina, my coaches, Coach Spiker, Coach Rainey, all you guys coming out. And last but not least, I know I'm going to embarrass her with my lovely fiance, all those things being said, I'm sorry if I miss anybody. Let's get right into it. Now, Harvard tells you that guns in school are not the answer. They go as far to tell you that it's actually going to decrease protection to have these guns in school. But what Harvard fails to realize is that schools today are targets. Our institutions have a responsibility and even a duty to assure protection of children. Arming everybody is surely not the answer. And in our plan, we are not arming everybody. But the reason has more to do with burdens, rights, and risks. This is a moral imperative to maximize insurance for the children whose care we are entrusting in these administrators. Children are not fully rational, they are not fully actualized. They need custodial care. They need to be accounted for. Now, our opponents failed to address our contention too, which speaks very heavily on this, on children not being able to think rationally. As a matter of fact, children are bringing guns to school themselves because they are not feeling protected. They are being very unprotected in the system. And for Harvard to tell us that we should leave the status quo as it is ridiculous. We're not using violence. We're merely using these guns as a deterrent, just in case a shooter comes on the campus. A child needs to know that he needs to protect what is his own. And when these children are at school, those administrators should treat the children as their own.
So you see using guns in schools as deterrents, but what about Columbine when there was an armed security guard? What about Virginia Tech where there was also guns on campus?
We can see that these guns on campus are not enough. Now, if we look at Sandy Hook Elementary and how Sandy Hook Elementary is set up, the shooter entered the front of the school. Administrators usually have their offices toward the front of the school. If they would have just come out when this shooter opened fire, we would have prevented the loss of 26 lives.
Here, here.
Now, to piggyback off of the contention too, which is heavily talking about how these children are acting irrationally by bringing guns to school, we have to realize that when people do not feel that those tasked with the protection are doing their job, they are going to seek their own protection. And their protection is not going to be trained like these administrators will be trained, and they're not going to be as reasonable as these administrators will be. Our opponents talk about how these administrators will go on and shoot innocent children as well as this shooter. But we have to realize that you have to be trained to conceal a hand weapon. These administrators are going to be trained to be able to fire these weapons. And sure, they may not have the best shots in the world, but it's going to be a lot better than risking the lives of these innocent children.
Here, here.
In the Great Migration, millions of African Americans found that the notion of equal protection under the law was more of lip service than police protection. Absent a guarantee of their protection from thuggery, assault, and murder, our ancestors continue to fight. And that's what we need to do. We continuously need to fight for these children's lives and for what we believe in. Yeah.
New York Police Department has a 32% accuracy rating. Whenever a teacher fires a gun, they have more than half of the chance to miss and potentially hit a child. How do you justify endangering children?
I would say that the risk of those administrators having weapons in the first place will be far better than taking no action at all.
Here, here.
Let's talk about their point on fear very briefly before I sit down. First and foremost, I said this logic of fear that they're talking about is selectively applied. We don't put police presence in risky communities out of the danger of creating fear. These children are actually going to feel more protected when we have these administrators carrying hand weapons. I don't know about you, but when I do go to school, I feel very comfortable in knowing that the administration at my school is going to do whatever they can to protect my life and protect those around me. At that point, I'm not going to want to bring a gun to school because I know it's against the rules to protect myself, nor am I going to feel unsafe. I'm just saying that when we have these administrators carrying these concealed hand weapons, it's only going to make situations better. We need to look at the cost-benefit analysis of this. It's just the good in this plan is definitely going to outweigh the bad when we have what's happening at Sandy Hook Elementary.
Before I begin my speech today, I want to thank the few people who helped make this event possible. Thank you to Mr. Medina and the rest of the coaches here at Wiley. They've been extraordinarily gracious and accommodating to us, and we're really grateful to be here. Thank you to our esteemed opponents. They took the time to show us around the campus earlier today, and they've been extremely welcoming, and we've really had a great time getting to know them. And thank you to all the members of the debate team and everyone who came out here today to support us and to help make history here at Wiley College. Ladies and gentlemen, we on side opposition fundamentally believe that the solution to a problem is not to add more of the problem to the mix. For this reason, we are extremely proud to oppose today's resolution that school administrators be trained and authorized to carry concealed firearms on school grounds. I'm going to begin by reiterating some of the points that my partner Tehu brought up in his speech and expand on them with some additional analysis, and I'm going to move on to my opponent's points. So my partner Tehu first discusses that there are two ways that guns could conceivably decrease violence in schools, but that in reality both of these are not actually going to occur. He says that in terms of symbolic deterrence, it's possible that people won't try to harm children in schools anymore because they see these guns there as a deterrent and will therefore not go anymore. But we have a few responses to this. First of all, those who go shoot up schools are not rational actors to begin with, and they're not necessarily going to be deterred by rational consequences. Many of them, like Adam Lanza at the Sandy Hook shooting, committed suicide. These people are not rational actors. They're not going to necessarily be deterred by the threat of a gun in the school. So we think that we can't necessarily apply rational analysis to these individuals. And even if you believe that these individuals are rational actors, we believe that the perpetrators will also likely realize that the administration will not effectively be able to respond for several minutes in many cases. If they're stationed at one end of the school, they can go to the other end of the school. The policy is not a mandate for guns, furthermore, so we believe that the amount of deterrence that this policy will generate overall is going to be extremely minimal in the scope of these individuals and their individual decision calculus. The second way that Tehu says that that guns in schools could conceivably help keep children safer is the ability of administrators to take out a shooter. But we see a number of fundamental flaws with this. First of all, he brings up another point about the accuracy of guns, the accuracy of shooting, and the ability to take out a shooter in the school. And he brings up a really alarming statistic that the NYPD has a 32% success rate when they're aiming at a target. We saw this come to like a real life example of this last August in New York City when 9 bystanders were hit in the process of trying to take out one individual, one perpetrator at a very close range. The fact of the matter is, guns are not likely the way that we see them in movies where one person walks into a room and takes out all the bad guys, bang, bang, bang. It's much harder to hit a target, especially in a situation of extreme stress, of extreme trauma. We don't think that it's necessarily realistic that administrators are going to be adequately trained to deal with these weapons. And we furthermore would argue that these administrators are going to be physically separated from the students clustered in the main office area. They're talking about, not at this time, sorry. They argue, okay, go ahead.
You mentioned in your message you talked about 9 bystanders were hit someone. Can you repeat that piece of evidence?
Yeah, 9 bystanders were hit by a police shooting. They were attempting to hit a perpetrator at close range, but the accuracy of their shots was very minimal.
Again, is there a way that we can put a price on lives, especially the lives of children within schools?
Well, I mean, obviously side opposition would like to save the lives of children in school. We think that the correct way to doing that is not to give administrators weapons that they don't necessarily know how to use, which can endanger children through friendly fire, for like bullets that are not hitting their intended targets. We think that this is a much more greater risk being posed today with this topic. Okay. So as I was saying, administrators are often going to be physically separated from their students and clustered in the main office area, so we believe that their ability to effectively respond to an attacker on site will be extraordinarily limited, and that when these administrators do come, they will often hit innocent bystanders in the process because of the fact that accuracy is so minimal in times of extreme stress and extreme trauma. Tehu's second constructive argument deals with the idea that arming administrators would endanger students much more, and I want to dig into the analysis here a little bit deeper. So according to the American Journal of Epidemiology, the presence of a gun in a private home statistically increases the likelihood of violent death in that home, all other factors being equal. And we believe that the same analysis could likely be applied to schools in many ways. And there are a number of different ways that we believe this. One is through the escalation of conflict when administrators are armed with weapons. And this may seem like kind of a far-fetched scenario, but we believe that it's actually very realistic. There's a lot of really interesting psychology related to guns, and that because someone merely has to pull a trigger, because they merely have to move their finger 1 centimeter, they don't necessarily see the weight of their actions. They don't necessarily take into account the magnitude of what they're doing. And because of this, individuals are more likely to act rashly and foolishly when they have guns, and are likely to provoke irreversible consequences when they have these guns. So we believe that the ability of conflicts to escalate out of the hands, be it between 2 students, be it between a student and an administrator, a student and a teacher, all these instances in schools, children are going to be much more endangered if administrators have guns. We believe that giving the principal the ability to shoot his or her students, even if they are not the intended targets with the gun, opens up a ton of safety concerns, and that's something that we're really concerned about. And we furthermore believe that, especially at the high school level, students in many cases are going to be physically dominant over these administrators and can potentially be able to obtain the guns and jeopardize not the administrator and the school as a whole. We believe that having guns in these schools is going to open up a ton of safety issues in this sense. And the last way that we believe that arming administrators endangers students more is through creating a culture of guns in schools. And Tehu talks about this a little bit at the end of his speech. And this is because students begin to see guns as an essential part of daily life. They begin to see guns as the first response whenever they have a problem, whenever they have a conflict in their lives. And as a result, they're more likely to turn to guns in the future. We believe that passing this resolution will tighten the link between guns and schools, and that's something that we simply don't want to stand for, because it creates a culture of guns and violence in schools, and that's extraordinarily dangerous for students and for society as a whole. Now, moving on to some of Tehu's other analysis. We talked a little bit about how guns will impact the educational environment in schools. And we believe that the impact of guns, arming administrators, will negatively impact educational outcomes in schools in a number of different ways. First of all, by creating a system of fear and a culture of violence in schools, because of having these guards around schools and having guns in general decreases feelings of safety. My partner Tehu brought up a study by the Youth Society Journal that indicated having armed guards in schools decreases feelings of safety and security by students, and this fear leads to distraction and worse academic outcomes. We also believe that arming administrators would increase student-administrator divides in the sense that students would feel less comfortable like approaching their guidance counselors, approaching their principals when they have a problem, if these people have an arm with them at all times. We believe that this decreases the ability of these administrators to address serious academic and behavioral issues, and that in turn leads to worse educational outcomes. And something else that we really want to reiterate here is that this will cause many qualified administrators to feel the pressure to leave the field of education because they don't feel comfortable carrying a weapon. And it could furthermore deter many talented people from entering the field of education because they don't want to work in a school environment where guns are commonplace and where carrying a firearm is part of their daily job. It's not something that they signed up for as a school administrator. So we believe that the willingness to have and use a gun shouldn't be a prerequisite to being an educator. We don't think that that's something that we should stand for. I want to do a little bit of deconstruction here at the end of my speech. So our opponents talked about the idea that schools are targets right now. And while we agree to some extent, we think that the current system, although it is imperfect, is the best option that we have. We don't want to arm administrators with guns because they won't be able to adequately use the guns. As Tehu brought up, the best option is to wait for trained professionals to respond to the scene that is empirically proven to be the best response. We furthermore he also brings up the idea that these administrators will be trained adequately, that they'll be able to respond to the situations perfectly, and we believe that this crash course in guns, no matter, has in no capacity can match a full-time police force, the ability to adequately train and use a gun. We don't believe that this is something we should stand for. Because the abilities of administrators to effectively stop shooters in schools is limited, because arming school administrators dangerous students and creates a culture of guns and violence in schools, and because putting more guns in schools is empirically proven to decrease educational outcomes, we're extremely proud to oppose. Thank you.
Our people, our schools. Let's address the first question. Government says that the best way to survive a school shooting is to fight, is to have a response that's quick, is to go in and mow down the perpetrator. But we've seen some issues with this argument. We brought up the complexities of fighting in your school. We brought up the 32% accuracy rating that trained, experienced police officers with field experience have, much less school administrators. We've also brought up the fact that these administrators will then use violence as that first resort. So easily accessible are guns, if they are allowed in the hands of administrators, that they will be used in that first resort. That escalates the violence, that can escalate minor altercations or individual shootings that may only target one person, or threats by firing off a gun, into spree killings because they are afraid of administrators that are trying to come and mow them down. We brought up these complexities of fighting, and we've concluded that to intervene in this way will only lead to more casualties. And even though our hearts may ache because we feel like we're doing little, we're actually doing a lot. We are sheltering children in our classrooms. We are making them escape the scene. We are ending the fight preemptively, and that is our solution, the status quo, flight. Because we can continue fighting a battle, but fighting a battle only escalates that battle until it's over. We need to instead end the battle by removing the targets, by calming down a tense and fraught situations when people aren't thinking rationally. These people need to be calmed down so that they can surrender and not escalate the situation. And we've brought up that the people to do this are police officers that have a strategy, a coordinated response, that don't want to get mixed up in figuring out who's doing the shooting and who's being shot at. We've argued that this is the best response that saves the lives of our children. The second question, what is best for our schools? Side government says that students may feel more secure because there are guns in their schools to protect them. After all, why do small children now bring guns to school? We have had several responses. Firstly, we've cited studies that show this that clearly disagree with the member of the government, that the majority of people don't feel safe around guns, that the gun culture and the atmosphere that guns creates, the accidents that can happen, the escalation that can happen creates a culture of fear, that we are scared of our administrators, of our principals and of our vice principals, people that we're supposed to be disciplined by or people that we're supposed to talk our problems with when they grow that severe. We will be afraid to confront our problems with them. And that fear will impact academic performance. We've also said that in terms of what's best for our schools is not to escalate situations when vice principals and principals are trying to extricate altercations, where they're ending a cafeteria fight, where they're ending a fight between a student and a student and a teacher, or a student and an administrator. When a gun is so easily available, it is so easy to take it out and shoot them, but we can't do that, ladies and gentlemen. We need to calm the flames and not add more fire. And my partner brought up the point about obtaining weapons, that it's easier to obtain weapons from administrators that are most often are physically weaker than students at the peak of their adolescence. And we've also brought up that this culture of guns is inappropriate for an institution of learning, that we should not militarize our schools, we should not convert chalkboards and classrooms into battlefields. Ladies and gentlemen, on side opposition, we oppose the conscription of our principals and vice principals. We oppose the endangerment of our children to satisfy our worries. We oppose raising our children in fear of guns, and we oppose more deaths. For these reasons, we are very proud to stand in opposition.
Around the room, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you all being here. And again, thank you, Harvard, for a fabulous debate. And thank you, judges, again, for moderating this debate. And also thank you to the student body and our coaching staff and team. First off, it is a new day in America. It is now time for us to protect our children, our innocence, and where we want our country to go. If we do not send a signal and a message to spree killers, as Harvard eloquently put it, to murderers, to gunmen, that they cannot come in and destroy our innocence, then I don't know what our country was founded for. I'm going to give you some reasons as to why you'll be knocking that chair for this side today. Let's go ahead and start off with number one. We gave you two concepts to deal with. Defensive measures. That's not always going to protect little Johnny or little Jefferson. You're not always going to be in a bulletproof class. It is time for us to what? Stand up. I want you guys to work with me as we move down these points. Moving to number two, the moral price for our conscience. We cannot continue to let these little ones have the feeling that they have to defend themselves, that they have to make paper milk cartons looking like guns, that they have to bring guns to school because they don't know if they're going to make it through the school day. Come on, students, you know how that feels. That is not fair to children across America. Moving down to the concept, they said that the administration feels pressure. Training is required. Training is required. We have a gruesome training plan, and that is what's going to differentiate the quick shooter from the thoughtful shooter. Moving down to the administration can't adequately handle guns. Come on now, if you have to protect your kids, your own, your school, your people, what would you do? Moving down to sheltering kids in classrooms, we're helping them by not having concealed carries. Tell me, how are you sheltering a child when you know if there's nobody to protect that child in that classroom, that Adam Lanza, that the Virginia Tech shooter may just walk in that classroom and shoot all 27 of those kids? If it's worth about, well, what is the best way to survive? It's not to fight. The best way to survive is to fight. We've learned that throughout our history, going from the foundation of this country till today. We have all had to fight for some type of right. And that's exactly what we've learned. Now I want to go ahead and again tell you why you're voting for us. You're voting for us for defensive measures and moral price of conscience. I wanted to give you a point to dwell on before we leave today. If you do not trust your school administrators to act on the information given to them, the premise of this debate is eroded. To presume that we can trust our educational administrators to make safety drills, absent of understanding of the threat that they face, is to presume that wishes can stop bullets. But if wishes could put an end to violence, there would be no grieving families in Texas, no grieving families in Colorado, no grieving families in North Carolina, no grieving families in Virginia, no grieving families in Massachusetts, no grieving families in the streets of Chicago or Washington, D.C. As it is, we are faced with the most bitter reality that in a world where an assailant can kill with a wish, we must transform our wishes into wisdom. And should we act in accordance with the truth, then an educated and carefully armed group of individuals can deter or stop violent massacres. We will find a world where kids can count on the opportunity to grow up, to wish, and to live. This resolution on the affirmative gives kids a chance to wish and to live. And if you want kids around the United States of America and the world to wish and live, then you will most definitely strike that ballot for the affirmative. Thank you for a great debate.
Prearranged, of course. And the decision is in the true tradition of Denzel Washington, president, who does direct movies. In the tradition of Alfred Hitchcock, Steven Spielberg, and the outcome was not expected. The decision of the judges. The decision of the judges is for these two teams to meet again in Seattle, Washington on February 6th. To meet again in Seattle, Washington on February 6, 2013 in an event sponsored by Starbucks.